Okay, excellent. I'll just move on to the next slide here by way of introduction. And just to clarify, I don't actually work for HL7 International, but HL7 International is the standards body in which I've participated in both leadership and participant positions for the last little over 20 years. So thank you very much for inviting me to present today. Given that I haven't had the opportunity to meet with you individually or on a countrywide basis to understand your common specific issues, I'm going to be speaking today somewhat in generalities. Some of what I cover today may already be known to you, but hang in, because I expect there'll be something new or something thought-provoking for everyone. I've had the pleasure and the pain of creating communities of use, designing and building and implementing mission-critical solutions to support these communities for over 45 years. And we won't have time on the call today for me to transfer all that I've learned and discovered along the way, but hopefully I can provide some guidance and lessons learned from my team's journey. And I'm hoping that we have, I see that Lorraine's on the call. I'm hoping Ron Parker will be joining the call as well. And this is part of the team that we've been working with also over many decades, both in the standards realm and in the eHealth realm, looking to move countries and communities of use forward. We focus very much, or I focus very much on eClaims and centralized exchange for the last 35 years, because we've learned of the tremendous positive impact that these can make on the working lives of practitioners, providers, and insurers, and through them to patients. We've also learned of the significant role that eClaims can play in moving a community or a nation forward in terms of standardization. For example, when I first went to Saudi Arabia in 2013, before we began to work there, all providers created and maintained their own codes for most things, including billing codes, which placed a huge burden on providers, but also on insurers, which had to write separate provider contracts based on each provider's proprietary coding. This countrywide approach would never have allowed for the effective exchange of clinical data or the creation of a unified patient health record. By starting with claims, which regardless of the revenue model pays for itself, the groundwork was completed to permit the standardization of clinical exchanges, which generally don't have a revenue model associated with them. And as you can see from the slide, which is up, I've been heavily involved in the standards domain, but I'm involved in the standards domain from a pragmatic perspective. In the projects and the communities I'm working with and supporting, they needed to have standards to achieve their goals. And that caused us to go and work in the standards community to create the tools and the standards that we needed to support our communities. But I've also come from a background of development and design of systems and actual implementation of systems, as well as the creation of the very standards themselves. So I'm going to cover sort of a wide scope of concepts and topics throughout this talk. It may appear a little fragmented. For that, I apologize, but I'm trying to touch the peaks of the icebergs, if you will, or maybe just the snow on the peak of the iceberg, of the kinds of things that you need to consider if you're going to build a community and then have that community implement eClaims. It's similar to what you would do if you were implementing e-clinical exchanges. But I want to point out a few perspectives that I have. Clinical exchanges, I would say, have historically been human-to-human communication mediated through technology. And what that means is there's an expectation of the role of the human in that exchange. The humans will filter out invalid data, so it's okay if invalid data comes through the system. The humans can resolve ambiguity. But as we move towards AI or clinical decision support systems, you'll find that those systems, one, don't have a human, and often, and two, they will require the quality and the validity and the rigor of financial exchanges. Now, financial exchanges I'll typify very differently. They're computer-to-computer communication, where ideally there's no human intervention, as that delays processing, introduces human error, and dramatically increases cost. I appreciate that everyone is not at the level in various countries of it being end-to-end computer-to-computer communication and computer-based adjudication. But we've had clients within the communities that we've built who've been doing 96% of their adjudication without human intervention since the early 2000s. So this is not the long, far future for most places. This is about where you should be starting to be in many countries that have been doing eClaims for years, and it's the goal that you should be reaching for in how you design and how you implement your models and your systems. So you can't assume that the clinical model translates into the financial model. It's not how the financial business operates or wishes to operate. And when you're creating combined exchanges, which are moving both clinical and financial information, you need to be aware of the business requirements of the two sides and how they differ. So generally, financial implementations or exchanges are implemented first because there's often regulation requiring the conduct of the providers and insurers to safeguard the interest of patients, as well as to create a sustainable and vibrant community of insurance to support the healthcare that people are getting. And that then permits you to define communities of interest, operationalize standardization, and address data quality issues, and then use this to catalyze the exchange of patient-related information for care delivery and public health. Talking about standards in general, what are the virtues of a standards-based approach? Why is a standards-based approach important? Well, it provides transparency, right? Standards approach means everyone has an equal voice, that there's a traceability of decisions, and therefore you can be reliant on that the materials that you're implementing are not going to veer out of the way, which means you can safely adopt and expect that this will be form a foundation for how you conduct business. And generally it is member driven. Different standards bodies have different concept of members. ISO, a member is a country. HL7, a member is an individual. But regardless of which model is being followed, it comes from the members, from the community. It's not a top-down approach, it's a bottom-up approach. The business value of standards is they reduce the work, they improve the quality, they reduce churn, and improve time to market of changes. But also looking at a country, they improve the ability to import or export software, products that support those standards. And they place the responsibility and control with the community of implementers, the community of users. So that's putting the control in the hands of the people who have to use those information exchanges, and that's the right place to put it. But you've got to remember that all standards, including FHIR, which I understand you've recently got quite a few people have undergone training in FHIR, and that's tremendous. But all standards, including FHIR, require rigor to craft solutions which support your business. And I'll get into more depth on that in just a little while. Before I start getting into some of the more detailed things, I do want to, though, introduce an African proverb. You may be familiar with it. This is going to sound a little high level, but it's extremely applicable to health IT. And that proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. When you go alone, you leave a path, but when you go together, you build a road for others to follow. For us, in our world, going alone means building proprietary solutions. Going together means building communities that use standards. And this is where you want to be. So when you look at projects in this space, you could say, yeah, but it'd be faster if we just rolled something ourselves. And that's true, it would be. But it'll be based on all of the knowledge that you have, and just the knowledge that you have. And it won't be robust over time. I can assure you that all of us who are together on this call are much smarter, certainly than I am individually. And I hope you'd all agree that we together are much smarter than we are individually. We also need to think about understanding the nature of the problem you're trying to solve when you're building a national solution in a community. When we're talking about building and exchanging eClaims, fundamentally, this is not a technical problem. So you need to stop looking for a technical solution. It's a business problem for which there are some business and technical requirements where technology can help. And in those places, that's where you look for technical solutions. But you've got to approach this from a business first approach so that you are in fact implementing the business of eClaims that the providers and the insurers operate. And as a general statement about interoperability, I will assert, is also not a technical problem, nor is it a business problem. It's a people problem. It's a people problem which creates technical problems. It's a people problem which creates business problems. But it is not fundamentally a technical or a business problem. It is a people problem. It comes down to what we expect. If we do not expect interoperability, we will not achieve interoperability. And that's been a long-standing issue in healthcare in general. We have permitted things to go off in proprietary ways that don't connect, that don't interface well. And that's because of expectations, not whether or not there were solutions or approaches that could have been applied from a business or a technical realm. The solution is it's not one and done, right? This is not something that you will go and we'll build an eClaims system and that's it, and that'll be it for life, and now we can go concentrate on other things. Yes, we will need to do something. Yes, we will need to be able to concentrate on other things, but it will be a learning and evolving thing because technology changes over time, healthcare changes over time, insurance changes over time, and you need to think of this as a process and an ongoing living process that will learn over time, as opposed to just doing something once and then you can ignore it. If we look at the typical health ecosystem, and this is regardless of country, they're typically surrounding the patient. We have the healthcare ecosystem, which has got regulation and licensing. There'll be vision clinics, labs, rehab, dental, medical, pharmacy, laboratory, hospitals, diagnostic centers, and insurance companies and third-party administrators. There will be some parties I've left out of that picture, and that's okay. They know where they are. They go to work every day. But we must also remember, if you look down at the bottom, there are the vendors. And the vendors are the people who provide hardware, software support, and consultants, and they are critical to the success of the above organizations. I very often, when people are looking at eClaims, they say, okay, now we've got to go make sure that we get the docs on board with this. And by docs, when we use that term loosely, we also mean dentists, chiropractors, pharmacists, etc., all of the healthcare providers who are key to the delivery of healthcare. But the reality is they don't put through claims. Typically, their staff put through claims. So you've got to understand the community in which you're trying to move, that you're trying to educate, that you're trying to engage, and realize that there are at least 3 layers to them. You've got owners and C-suite and managers. These are people who are looking for business decisions and strategy. Should we be following standardization? If so, what standards? How are we going to manage that? How is that going to impact the marketplace? It does require user acceptance, but they're not going to look at your data types. They're not going to look at what you're programming in, right? They're looking at it from a business perspective. And typically, they're not going to allow you to move forward unless their users, their managers and users inside their organization are comfortable with whatever it is you're talking about. So you need to have a completely different conversation with the users. The users and their managers are concerned about transition impact, about the risk to the things they do today, about the learning curve, and the solution benefits or detractors. Again, no one here is talking about the standards you're using, your data types, what languages you're programming in. Then there are the people who actually build the systems that the users use, and those are the implementers and vendors. Whether those are implementers within a healthcare provider or an insurance company, or whether they're a vendor of software to those organizations, they're the ones who care about standards, et cetera, because they're concerned about capabilities, support, what the vision is, and what the risk is, risk of change and risk of adoption. So there's always opportunities and there's risks, and knowing them is key to be able to move forward. Again, because you see, while we're going to be talking about technology, I'm going to take it from a business first approach. If we look very quickly at the typical patient journey, and this applies everywhere, not all parts apply or are used in every domain, but a great number of them will be. And you will notice across on the left-hand side here, we have the beneficiary at the top. We've got the healthcare provider in red down below that. In the bottom left, we have the health insurer. You will see a bar come across here for a clearinghouse, and that's to depict how that information would go through a clearinghouse. But this picture is equally applicable whether or not there is a clearinghouse. If there's no clearinghouse, just imagine that bar is not there. The flows will still be roughly the same. So typical patient journey is the patient goes to the provider for a consultation. Patient provider needs to know, is this person eligible for services, which is usually in asking the question of, does the person have insurance coverage and is that coverage valid? That will result in some kind of eligibility request going through, and there's that clearinghouse I mentioned, through the insurance company, which will do its processing and determine whether or not, in fact, that party is eligible either for that service or at that provider, or whether they have insurance at all. They will send back some kind of response. That may include the information about their insurance policy, or it may just be an answer as to whether or not the policy is in force. That will then allow the provider, upon receiving that, determine what they're going to do, work with the patient, and if they have coverage, they'll go ahead and start working on a treatment plan. In developing that treatment plan, there may be some things which require authorization, in which case they may send an authorization request through to the insurance company. That might result in a message going to the patient, typically via SMS, to indicate an authorization's been submitted on your behalf. It might require some supporting information, and so the insurance company and the provider may communicate back and forth as they're exchanging supporting information for that. But at the end of the day, the insurance company will result in a prior authorization response indicating what's required. That will go back. There may now be a message going to the patient saying your authorization has been answered. And that then allows care to occur. Provider provides care. That will result in a logical invoice, but usually not a physical one at that point, because from that invoice, they'll be able to consider copayment. They will be able to generate claims for any of the insurance companies. The claim will go through to the insurer. If they hadn't got the supporting information before, they'll be able to obtain that supporting information now. That would result in a claim response going back to the provider. And then charges can be made if there's anything outstanding for the patient, as well as at some point in time, the insurance company will then forward payment, and the provider may indicate back to a central system some kind of payment confirmation. So these are the common tasks that occur in electronic claims. The reason we have little fire symbols here decorated here is to let you know that each of the exchanges here are already addressed in FHIR. For those of you who've taken some training, you may or may not be familiar with that, and I'll show you an implementation guide shortly, which covers some of those use cases. So I introduced a clearinghouse in that picture, and my leaning is towards using a clearinghouse. Why? Well, in Canada, I'm Canadian, by the way, we went from 1992 to 2003 without a clearinghouse, peer-to-peer communication. Now, peer-to-peer communication requires the standards, so that's good. Developing the standards for coding or terminology, and standards for data exchange. Those are the two important things to have. It then, once you've got the standards, you could then let the market implement them at their own pace. But large providers and insurers have a tendency to go off standard, to put in their own special interpretations. And as soon as people start to walk away from standards and take them and start to modify them on their own, what you're doing is creating proprietary specifications. It's harder to police, it's harder to address and corral it back in. And therefore, each party has to implement all the services they need to function. Each party has to manage the communication targets being down. And regulators have no independent means to assess complaints from the marketplace other than trying to go to those parties and gather some information directly from them. When you have a clearinghouse in the middle, this changes the equation. It becomes a single point of contact for all stakeholders. It reduces the implementation and change burden by centralizing services. It can provide a neutral, unbiased party with a non-competing mandate for reporting and for data. The greatest risk, however, for stakeholders is it sits between themselves and the communication target, right? So it's like this is now inserted between you and your customer, right? And that introduces some concern and some risk. And so it's extremely important when you have a clearinghouse that you be a good faith broker and a good faith partner. It creates greater cost, risk, and liability for the clearinghouse, but lower overall cost for the community. So creating and maintaining a clearinghouse requires leadership on many levels. Most parties don't want to be the leader. So if you're going to create one, you need to be the leader that others want to follow. And in so doing, you'll find that the community can form and will follow along with you as long as you're a leader that's worth following. So I'm going to describe two clearinghouses, two clearinghouse-based solutions. One will be Nafis, which is in Saudi Arabia. It is completely FHIR-based, based on FHIR R4. It's real-time exchange, store and forward, but currently the insurance companies are using deferred adjudication. What I mean by that is they'll respond automatically in real time to a status check or to an eligibility check, but an authorization or a claim, they receive it and they process it later. Authorizations in Saudi Arabia are required to be processed within 60 minutes or they are deemed approved. Claims have to be processed within 30 days. The physical reality is it was a challenge to do when there was no electronic system. It was a challenge for the regulator to even tell whether or not people were falling within the regulatory guidelines. However, with the advent of the Nafis system with electronic claims based on FHIR going through a clearinghouse, they are now doing 96% of authorizations are processed within 30 minutes. It's quite a dramatic change. Now, this is all described in an implementation guide. I will branch over to that just for a second so you can see what we're talking about. Okay, so this is their implementation guide based on FHIR. And for those of you who've just been through the training and are used to looking at a FHIR specification, this is available. I've got the link in the slide so you can go take a look at this. This is currently in ballot. The ballot actually closed last weekend, and it'll be reconciled. Now, what's unusual here is most FHIR implementation guides people create and then they look to pilot or implement. This has actually been in production since 2021. It's been in production for 4 years. Last year, they moved 280 million claims through, or transactions through, sorry about that. And this year, they're on target to move about 400 million transactions through the system. They just didn't know at the time it began how to build an implementation guide or how to read one. So we used the profiles and the terminology, et cetera, through spreadsheets and Word document, et cetera, technology that they understood. Now that it's all been implemented and used, we've moved all of that into a formal implementation guide, and this is how they will manage it forward. But this implementation guide also becomes the standard that they will follow for all of the implementation guides in the country. And the pattern of implementation guides will mature countrywide. I want to touch on a couple of features of this before I move on, because this is the most extensive implementation guide. I'll give you just a quick background here. Yeah, I mentioned here, these are the volumes that they've put through. They're servicing 13 million beneficiaries. They've got over 5,000 providers, 25 insurers, 60 software vendors, et cetera. The majority of the private claims market is going through this system. So they provide background information as to the context in which they're operating this. The specification contains information on conformance and message structures, what they look like and how the information flows, all the different types of messages that can go between a healthcare provider, the central clearinghouse, and the insurance companies. Every use case uses this picture or a subset of this picture to describe the flow of the transactions as they go through the system from a healthcare provider to an insurer, or from an insurer to a healthcare provider. In terms of the use cases, this covers eligibility, prior authorization, advanced authorization, which is a situation where the insurance company is in fact sending the authorization to the provider before they even ask for it. This could be the case of, a patient had surgery and now they need to go for rehab. The insurance company knows that and communicates. Or a patient called their insurance company directly and says, I've got a toothache. Who should I go to? Where's a dentist who's within my network? And they could send that authorization directly on. It was used in part during COVID for pharmaceutical refills. Single claim submission, as well as sending in batches of claims. Payment notice and reconciliation, as well as cancellation notices, sending supporting information, requesting supporting information, doing polling, that's coming in and getting deferred messages, as well as doing status checks. So this is all the use cases. There's then, a separate page for each use case going into the details. I want to touch on the artifacts here for a second. This is where this guide is unusual for implementation guides. If you've gone through your fire training, then you know about creating fire profiles. That's where you take one of the fire resources, which are defined in a very general sense because fire doesn't know your use case. So we define the base structures to be extremely flexible. You've got to bring the use case and your requirements together, and that's where you express that in a profile. But you'll find, I would say, that most implementation guides done in fire are not prescriptive enough to be interoperable. People could take those guides and have differential understandings of what it is they're supposed to do. And that just creates more work and more churn and less interoperability in the marketplace. So you'll find that this is quite specific. So this has got authorizations for institutional care, oral, pharmacy, professional, and vision. 5 different authorizations, 5 different claims, because the business requirements for those are different. But in addition to this, you also find there's an abstract profile. So they went and created a base claim profile that had all of the profiling in that was necessary for Saudi. And then they took that profile and broke that into the institutional, the oral, etc. It's a better way to manage your information over time. It's clearer for implementers. It's classic inheritance if you look at it from an information model or a programming perspective. But additionally, you'll find that fire resources are full of elements made up of data types. But data types often contain sub-elements. And I'll go to the simple case of a period. A period is a data element that's got a start date and an end date, both optional in fire. Well, that's not sufficient to drive interoperability because you could, in fact, need a period data type where both ends are optional. You do sometimes, although it's unusual. More often, you'll find that maybe both dates are required, or maybe only the start is required, or only the end is required. So what we've done here is we've created data type profiles so that everywhere, when only an end date is required, that's actually coded as a period 4. It's clear for implementers. It's clear for business people to go, yeah, that's what it should be, right? It's a consistent pattern rather than trying to figure that out. And then when we develop the actual profiles they're using, for example, an institutional claim, here's the profile. You'll notice some things are a little different. The data types are actually indicated in the data type profile that should be used. So you've got highly prescriptive. We indicate the lengths of all the fields where it's necessary. You'll find that all the business rules and constraints have been applied directly to the in the profiles themselves. So this is a very good thing. I'm not saying that you just take this and implement it because that wouldn't be appropriate, because I can assure you none of you base your systems on the Saudi billing codes. Okay, you'd have your own. but as something to take a look at and ask yourself, if we're not doing this, why are we something like this? Why are we not doing something like this? Okay, you can go and take a look at that further on your own. So this has been in production for since 2021 using jurisdictionally prescriptive profiles, and there are regulations in Saudi covering the exchange of information, the timing, and they're required to use these specifications. Prior to eClaims, there were no exchange standards, no terminology standards. Regulations regarding exchange for adjudication and payment timing existed, and the regulator had no visibility in the marketplace. A different one I want to describe is one done in Canada. Now, Canada began in 1992 doing peer-to-peer exchanges based on their local standards. And the same was true in oral health and in pharmacy. We brought in the V3 messaging for vision in 2000s. They were proprietary. Beginning in the early 2002, 2003, we started to put together a centralized clearinghouse, went live in 2004. Okay, so we're talking 21 years ago. That system handled multiple standards. It handled the oral health standards are live and have been since 2004. Vision and pharmacy, one was piloted, but neither of them are in current live production because the owner of that system decided to stop and just stay in the oral health space. Real-time exchange of store and forward, mostly real-time adjudication. In fact, not only will it real-time adjudicate proprietary claims, but primary claims, but there are insurance companies that are real-time adjudicating secondary claims as well. Replaced a peer-to-peer system that began in 1992. It's been in production since 2004. There are no regulations in the country requiring that it be used. It's being used by the industry, and it's the major system it is the system in the dental space, and it is that because of value. So regulation is useful to help guide, but it won't make things happen. Value will make things happen. Prior to eClaims, they did have standardized paper forms and terminology, though. There are no regulations regarding exchange or payment, and the regulator had no visibility into market activity. I provided you with a table of sort of some of the key differences between these two systems. One of the key ones is Nafis is a for-profit. Saudi Arabia does not have income tax, and so very often when government or quasi-government services are operated, they generate some money, which then helps to underwrite the governments. Case of iTrans is not for profit. They're both providing, complete industry coverage, a large number of vendors, software sites, insurers, in both cases, high percentage of the market share the claim. Very different costs to them, both doing high volumes of transactions. Big difference is the one we did in 2004 is a hot primary and disaster recovery site, which means it's instant failover and no loss of, less than a minute loss of data in sort of the worst case, whereas the system in Saudi Arabia is a hot warm system where it would take hours to switch over to the other site. It's a matter of perceived cost and design, etc. And in a separate call, I could explain some of those issues and features. So when you're going to go ahead and create something, what do you need to do? The very first thing you need to do is develop a philosophical perspective of what are you doing and why are you doing that? So are you developing a community of parties who need to exchange claims and the common infrastructure for them because you want to be a large software vendor, or because you want to make money, or because you want to make it work better, et cetera, et cetera. There are a variety of different goals and roles that you could have, but you need to know the business that you're in. And then you need to understand what that business approach will have on your stakeholders. They may choose not to join with you, even though you're doing a wonderful thing, because you are competing with them. right? So you need to very much understand that, and that will guide everything you do, down to the selection of software, the selection of hardware, how you will market, etc. What you're doing. So that's why that is key. It is very often lost and needs to be refreshed, that notion, but that is key. You need to bring in the regulatory dimension. Regulations can support but cannot enforce success. And your regulations generally will need to change to support the community as the community evolves. So if you haven't done eClaims, your regulations will change from before you do eClaims to while you're implementing to later on as the community grows and expands. From a legal perspective, you're going to need to understand the impact of liability for the parties. You need to make sure that in doing your solutions that you're not overreaching and that you're not shifting liability from someone else to yourself unless you've done so with your eyes wide open and the approval of all the parties. You need to be extremely mindful of implementers, whether they're providers, insurers, or vendors that are implementing. They are your gatekeeper. They're not always your decision makers of who's going to consume their product, but they have the client relationships and they know the business better than you do, generally. You will need to have standards, but which standards? Fire or some other standard? Are you going to move a complete message in Fire, or are you going to move individual resources? And why? If you're going to use Fire, are you going to really create a Fire server or a Fire facade? And I can tell you in Saudi, there isn't a Fire server in the mix. It's just they're just facades. Are you going to create a new implementation guide? If you're using Fire, are you going to adapt an existing one? For persistence, okay, now we're going to get a little bit into data. Are you going to store whole messages or resource instances, or do you have a canonical model you're going to extract the content into? What terminology are you going to use? Right? Is it SDO managed or locally derived or a hybrid of the two? And in terms of infrastructure, it's bound to be a cloud type design, but it's going to be outsourced or on premises. Is it going to be your servers in a data center, or is it going to be just servers that you're renting on a per server basis? Are you going to require open source, or are you going to deny any open source? Right? These are all the kinds of decisions that need to be made, and this list is not exhaustive. I'm just touching the top of it. The kinds of people you need to engage, and sorry, I'm going to speed up a little bit here. I made up this term of a content evangelist. You're going to need to have someone who holds the role referred to as the keeper of the light for the overall business and technical interoperability and approaches. Someone who can work with you to help you understand not just what you need to do today, but what you need to do today for tomorrow, and where you can, and help you understand where you can want to go so that you can make those decisions and you can go there. That resource can be shared across jurisdiction, but it's someone who needs to know what's possible, and needs to know the business and the technology, etc. That's someone who very often can be used to speak to your marketplace to explain where it's possible to go to. And in one of the key messages that I've been delivering to audiences for better part of 40 years is, having done this, it is work, right? Moving from a paper-based eClaims world, etc., to a world where you bring in all of the different types of payers eventually, and that you move from proprietary exchanges or paper-based exchanges to electronic exchanges, makes a dramatic difference for the efficiency and the financial wellness of the entire community, as well as the individual providers and insurers. But it is climbing a mountain. And so you need someone who's been over the mountain, if you will, to help you go over the mountain. The paths you discover will be slightly different. They are for each country. But having someone who's been there before makes a big difference and gives a lot of confidence out to the marketplace. And the key message I've usually delivered to the marketplace is, having done this several times, everyone goes kicking and screaming. Okay, but they go once they have faith that this is a sustained decision and a reasonable risk to undertake. But in every case, once they've gotten to the other side of that mountain, no one is ever asked to go back. Normally what they say is, well, why didn't you make me do it sooner? Right? Which is human, but it's amusing that they struggle to go there. And then once they're there, they own it and they use it. And it's a tremendously valuable thing. So it's a funny human behavior. You'll also need some non-content evangelists. What do I mean by those? Those are the people who know the organizations and the resources. They know who to talk to in government or the regulators, etc., to help bring it along. So they can bring that local perspective and that local language that is so important in what it is you're doing. You're not doing something on a global basis. You're doing something in country. You might do something common with the country next to you or surrounding you, but you are always delivering in country. You need people who know who are the right people to be communicating with. So those parties need to work together. But you'll also need business analysts to extract the information on the current model and to review future models. But the business analysts are unlikely from the current model to see what the future should be or could be. You'll need standards developers who'll need to know what the models is you're trying to implement, and then to be able to cast those into standard form and develop test cases and artifacts that can then be used in conjunction with the marketplace. And you'll need implementers to trial and ultimately implement and deploy conformance systems. Three things I wanted to point out. Knowledge. Knowledge is what the business is about now and may provide insight for the future. Okay, so knowledge is a key thing to have. Knowledge doesn't really tell you what the future is going to be, but you've got to know where you stand today, how the business operates today. Skills tells you about how to do, but not what to do or why, right? So your legacy of this project of creating a community and creating a common infrastructure to make things work more efficiently, you're not done then. And your goal is not, and your claim to fame won't be what hardware or software or processes you implement. Your goal will be to build the knowledge and skills in the workforce and the management to effectively continue the evolution of this long after you. And experience is a different thing again. It tells you what to do, what to learn, and why. And it's the hardest thing to obtain and the longest thing to create. So import the experience you need, but don't use it just to solve and avoid problems. Use it to educate the community so in the future you're self-sufficient and you're able to trade your experience and trade your projects with others. In terms of the human factors to manage, Alvin had asked me this question when we spoke a couple of months ago. He said, "Well, what do you think? What's the major risk?" And I spent much of my summer with this going through the back of my head. Thank you, Alvin. But a song lyric from a Canadian song came to my mind: "It's not what you're sure of; it's what you don't know," and that's where the risk lies. Except, upon reflection, it's also what you're sure of, but you're wrong. So knowledge is key and assumption is a problem. Human behavior risk. Humans have a tendency to either freeze or proceed blindly based on insufficient information. We have a willingness to make and not check assumptions before we proceed. It's part of what makes us viable. And we're the apex predator for reasons, if you will. Corporate behavior risks, engaging parties with a known and expected level of skill. You need to do that. But when you discover their experience is lacking, replace the parties or augment them where you get the actual skills. Yelling and withholding funds does not make inexperienced vendors experienced, right? Your major risks are assumptions, inexperience, and turnover. Technology factors to manage your tools. You've got to know your tools and realize that your tools know nothing about your use case and they won't teach you the solution for them. Hammer and a saw, necessary tools to build a new clinic, but they won't design the clinic for you. Power tools aren't smarter than manual tools, right? They just reduce the labor. In our world, power tools are things like AI, AI is not going to give you your use case. And you couldn't validate whether or not the AI gave you the appropriate use case if you didn't already know what the use case was. Your CI/CD stack and Fire don't know your use cases, and there is no silver bullet. There's just inquisitive minds, quality work, and getting the job done. You are responsible for knowing your tools along with their anomalies and shortcomings, what artifacts they create in their own, and your business requirements for the near term, for the long term. What you should design and build. Don't design and build for today. You already have today and it's not working for you. That's kind of why we're having this chat. So design for the far future, build for the near future, and determine a roadmap to get from today to the near future to the far future. And remember that healthcare and insurance and technology are constantly changing. So I want you to be bold, but be pragmatic. Be prepared to rethink plans and listen intently to what people are telling you as you go through the marketplace. And be bold, what I mean is design beyond the specific requirements. So even though your project might be to implement the workers' compensation claims only, don't worry about retirement or private or public, or maybe it's one of those other segments. Worry about those other domains so that you can, as much as possible, build it once and use it many times. The team or the project or whatever is not ready for prime time, i.e., they still have significant work to do if they don't know what to do about coordination of benefit, and there's no coordination benefit plans, what to do about continuous testing and certification, how to handle claims and authorization instance errors versus adjudication results. Those are two different things. Whether credit and fire messaging give the same results. Now, for those of you who've just been through training, that's a good question. Do CRUD and fire messaging give the same results in exchanging information? The answer is no. Whether there's only one true patient or practitioner demographic record, there's a challenge for you. What are you going to do about versions? Whether you're recreating current silos just with new technology, right? That you need to avoid that. You can read the rest of these points, but again, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but these are the kinds of things you need to know. So in closing, you want to go far, not fast, but you want to go as quickly as possible. You need to go together, each finding your success in a single evolving solution. You need to be kind to each other and be supportive. When you're going through a development like this, it is hard, nerves get frayed, expectations get misaligned. Be kind to each other through that process. Collectively, this is your ecosystem, your business community, and your solution set for now and for the years ahead. Mistakes will always be made. They are your best learning tool, especially the mistakes of others. So help each other find them and fix them. And the journey may be hard at times, hopefully not too hard. But no matter how hard it is, it will be significantly easier than had you not taken the journey at all. Thank you very much. What I've covered here is sort of what we do every day, everywhere, and we're happy to assist. I'm open to questions.
Yes, thank you for that presentation and for sharing your wealth of experience, Sir Paul. Before we open the floor for questions, we would like to call on Ms. Emily Razal from the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation, our reactor for today's session.
Thank you, Paul, for your presentation. It's very much appreciated, especially for us here in the Philippines. We still have a very long journey ahead of us. By the way, I'm Emily Razal. I'm with the Special Project for UHC for Enterprise Architecture and National Health Data Repository under the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation. So I would like to share the experience of Philippines in the implementation of health interoperability standards using HL7 FHIR in the Philippines. So with the enactment of the Universal Healthcare Law, or RA Republic Act number 11223, way back in 2019, PhilHealth is mandated to develop and implement the National Health Data Repository. So since 2019, we've conducted several foundational activities to help in the implementation of NHDR. Some of those foundational activities include development of relevant policies, development of the Philippine core data for interoperability for NHDR and its implementation guide, including the orientation and advocacy activities for NHDR and PHCDI. Also, we were also helped by development partners by UP PhilHealth through the funding of CSIRO, wherein connectathon activities were conducted to also advocate the use of fire as a standard.
Yeah.
So the future plans for NHDR includes the review and updating of the terms of reference for its full-blown development, including the phased implementation using different use cases. So this use case-driven approach or model is being used by PhilHealth uh, to help in the development of NHDR. Through modeling, it defines and organizes the requirements of NHDR in terms of use cases. So use cases are developed to effectively envision the outcome, manage the scope and capture a set of requirements, and focus on useful ways to use and gain value if the system is used and drive incremental development of NHDR to completion. So Philippines has established clear legal and technical framework driven by the Universal Healthcare Law to build a robust national health data repository. So by mandating the use of interoperability standards through joint policies with the Department of Health, we will not just be collecting data, we are building a unified, interoperable digital backbone for the entire health sector. So we're just in the process of starting our journey. I know
Okay.
the Saudi Arabia and Canada has gone a long way. We're still in the starting stages of our journey. So the strategic shift is crucial for transforming the health policy, accelerating research, and ultimately ensuring every Filipino benefits from better data-informed healthcare services. So that's it for my reaction. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good thing. And so if you're early in the journey, and I'll point out, while we used a Fire R4 for Saudi Arabia, that was because we began in 2019, really, on the development work. At this point in time, if you're starting now, I would look to Fire R6. Fire R6 will publish sometime next year and has valuable learnings that we've taken from Saudi and from some of the US implementations of some of the Fire financial resources. And we've pulled that into R6. And so you'd be a better starting point if you were looking at, going into production late 26 or 27 or later. I would start looking at Fire R6 just as a general guidance.
So we've started with our mapping activities using Fire R4. So we've
Okay.
started mapping way back 2022.
Yeah.
So basically with the help of Lab Philippines, so they're helping us with our journey. And currently, we still need to put in place several guidelines to make it more operational.
We're just at the training phase, so we're using R4
Yep.
for training. So I think
Yeah, that's fine.
going to R6 is easier. We don't have an actual endpoint yet, so I think that's a
That's
very
great.
important suggestion. Thank you, Paul. Paul, we're over time, but it is an amazing session. I think if you're still available for another 15 minutes, let's address
Oh,
some of.
absolutely. You
Okay,
bet.
so from Francis Uy, he is our architect in the Philippines. What are some of the common pitfalls or incorrect assumptions that national insurance payers make when transitioning from older legacy eClaim system to modern fire-based data and infrastructure? Pitfalls.
Okay. Understanding interoperability and understanding optionality. It's funny that it would run into that problem. But I did run into that situation in Saudi in particular, where a number of the payers said, well, we're not going to include this information element because it's optional. And that's not what optional means. Something like date of death is optional. It's because you don't have one until you die. But if you've died, for sure, we need you to send it, right? So you need to understand that was a weird thing.
Okay.
You need, as a community, to come together and put together the standards, and that will then resolve a tremendous amount of the issues in terms of the your guidance or your chances of interoperability. But one of the other things is that very often I see payers looking very much like they're islands. And an example of that is you've got to realize that there is very likely to be some other payer ahead of you or behind you. That may not be occurring today, but that will occur in the future. The same way that many companies, Saudi Arabia, when I first went there, was a cash economy. When COVID came, so came TAP, right? And that was available in other places. It just wasn't there yet. And now, of course, it's there like it's everywhere in spades. So you've got to understand that. So very often what I see is insurance companies confusing the concept of what is an adjudication result versus what is an error. An error, when detected, should stop. An error means I am unable to process this, right? It's an invalid policy number. It's an invalid code. It is something which couldn't occur. The fact that someone has submitted a claim which your policy doesn't cover is not an error. You know what the answer is. The benefit amount is zero, but it's not an error. But the claim may have come to you first before it goes on to the next payer who does in fact cover it. So you need to spot errors and not confuse adjudication results with errors. Otherwise, you'll create churn, and you just may not be aware of that until the churn arrives.
Okay. From Dr. Thomas Nicola Reyes, how long did the development of the NFIS system take from inception to IG development to actual implementation?
Okay, so the IG was developed that they actually used in parallel, but we did it in Word and in spreadsheets because the parties that they wanted to have do the implementation guide had no experience in it.
Okay.
And the marketplace didn't know how to read one. So I guided them to use Word for the explanatory text, to use spreadsheets, because everybody's used to a spreadsheet that's got a data, field name, data type, what code is coming from, descriptive text. Everybody, we've used that since the 50s. So that was the technology we used. I've never seen anyone set up to do a system like this in less than a year. So expect that the marketplace will take a year. If they don't have consistency in claims, coding, experience, etc., then you could be looking at 18 months or longer. The minimum time I've ever seen people do it is when they're already experienced with eClaims and you're just changing a format. That could be more like 4 to 6 months. Don't over guess them. The doing of the implementation guide takes about a year. It depends on how well you know your use cases. It depends on how well the market understands things. So when we pulled this implementation guide, I started with them last November, and we went through, because the time it takes is not just the work of doing it, but is also the work of reviewing those stages as you go. So we developed one use case and took the structure and the one use case to the marketplace and spent about 3 weekly meetings reviewing that. Then we started into a natural expansion of a use case every week or two, where we were building upon people's knowledge. We stopped and did a review in April where we had 3 use cases, and we did it was a review, not a ballot, but we made it work the same way so they could get familiar with what the ballot process looked like, how to engage in a review, and force people somewhat to read implementation guides
Mhm.
And we had all 13 use cases developed and went into ballot this summer. So it was a quick cycle. There are that implementation guide, when you look at it, is fairly large. There are about 6,500 actual pages that the
Mhm.
building of the guide creates, and about 3 million links between different parts of the guide. So it
Right.
is quite extensive. There's hundreds of artifacts in terms of examples, terminology, etc. So there's a lot of decisions to be made. Make quality your guide rather than timing.
Mhm.
I at least come from the perspective, I know how to work with something that works but is late. I
Yeah.
don't know how to work with something that's on time and broken.
Yep. Mhm.
And that's a simple guidance,
Yeah.
but it's more important that you get it aligned with the business of the marketplace, and that will take time to engage the marketplace for them to feel comfortable with what it is you're doing, that you're
Mhm.
not pitching them off a cliff, if you will.
Right.
And that's where you really do need to invest time, reputation, and understanding so that they feel comfortable coming on this journey with you. Because ultimately, you're not going on the journey in the same way that the marketplace is,
Mhm.
right? They're the ones who are truly going on the journey. They're the ones who take all the risk.
Okay. So I think that also answers the question of Thomas about what are the catalysts. You said you started with a simple use case and then gradually, incrementally, together grew until what you showed
Yes.
us today, which is very complex. So we're not going to get everything overnight.
No,
We
no,
will
you're going
have
to go
to
through.
form a community that grows together, learning how to do all of these together.
Right. So you want to start with in your business analysis of what are we doing today, right? There will be a number of use cases, things that people are already doing. Begin with those. Begin with what they know, right? So when they know the business requirements, they know the flows, etc., then they can recognize where those flows occur, that content is being moved. They can recognize that in the new formalism being expressed in new data types, new resources, messages, etc. Once they've got that down, then you can start to get into those discussions of more elaborate flows. So meet the core requirements of the business, but the business should drive the selection of technology and the application of technology, not the other way around.
Okay, Paul, last two questions. From Rene. Uh, um, is FIRE flexible and adaptable to any commercial database? I think it's the persistence mechanism.
Oh, okay. So this is talking about persistence. Now, there's two different ways you could persist. You could either persist by persisting the resources as they are, or the messages that come in, or you could persist, um, have your own information model, and you pull the information out of the FIRE messages and put it in your information model. Which approach you use depends on what your job is. So if you look at the clearinghouse whose job is to move is what I refer to as a courier on steroids,
Mm-hmm.
right? You expect FedEx or whoever DHL to move your letter, but not to read your letter and not to interpret your letter. Now, in this
Mm-hmm.
case, you do read the messages because it should perform validation, right? So that it's looking to deliver information to the other side that's valid and usable, not something that blows up the software.
Right.
So there's a huge role for validation in the middle. If
Mm-hmm.
all that central system is doing is moving the information from one side to the other and is not a data repository and doesn't have any other roles, then it could persist the messages only in their native form, right? Because it's like moving boxes.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a box. You don't care about the contents. If, however, it's also going to be a central repository, which perhaps is used for analytics with respect to the claim side of the industry. Claim
Mm-hmm.
data is not a corollary for clinical data and shouldn't be used for treatment, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some health of the insurance industry insights you can gain, and you can gain insights in terms of what are the nature of the services that are being rendered, their frequencies, et cetera. if you're going to be pulling data out, then I would be, my inclination would be is that you have a canonical information model internally and you pull that data into that model. So the question, I'm going to reword your question into, can modern databases, are they all sort of generally equally amenable to storing either persisting objects, like a FIRE model, or persisting the data elements that are contained within? And the answer is yes. So whether you're looking at an Oracle, a Progress, MySQL, right, open source, non-open source, they're all equally good at doing so. Your selection of your database will come more to scale, cost, availability of support and people who can work on. That will matter more than, you know, what Paul likes.
So, Paul, last question. You mentioned going to R6 if we can. And can you just give an example of what might be a benefit of R6 over R4? Because R4 has been our training material, so there's not familiarity yet on the
Oh, R6, you know, stands on the shoulders of
Yes.
R4.
R4.
So it is extremely similar in the financial resources. I would say that there's a 90%, you know, there's probably less than 10% change, but in some of the areas, in body sites, in DRGs, instead of being the DRG code being an extension, it's a native element. We've caught some areas where we needed to either change the cardinality or change the structure of the information in order to make it work better or address a wider suite of use cases. So I think you'd find it to be an easy shift and lift. It won't be problematic in that regard, but it will be beneficial because you're going to have to go through that change at some point in time. You might as well start with that change, because what you're doing is not just for 2025 or 2026. You should be setting a foundation that will have, at least at the foundational level, a 20-year run.
Wow,
Your
20 years.
Oh, the standards and the work that I did back in 1992 are still alive and still running. Now, they've moved a bunch of their stuff over to the work I did in 1996. But yeah, this is the kind of lifetime you should be looking at the core infrastructure and standing. I'm not saying you create the message and you don't change it for 20 years. You want to be able to change it and mature it as you need to, right? But not all parts of your industry are going to move at the same speed. And you need to be respectful and mindful of that and engineer for it. So now, when you look at R6, many of the financial changes haven't been applied yet, but they will be applied, a lot of them between now and let's say mid-November, and then there'll be another shot of them in the springtime, so that by about this time next year, R6 will my guess is R6 will publish in the fall of next year. And so yes, keep looking at R4, because the differences in R6 you can't see yet.
All right.
But yeah, when it comes to coding it, if you're coding in 2027, I do it against R6.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. We've been over time, but I think the questions were important and that they need to be addressed. What will happen is that we'll have our usual feedback from the participants, and then hopefully you will still be open to future sessions based on anything that they think might be useful.
Oh, absolutely.
Information.
This is our passion.
We'll send you the transcript, because there are some comments here that are favorable that you might want to have a copy from Binji and from Teodulfo Galliano. Meantime, may I request everyone to open their camera for our documentation. Charis, do you want to make the call? Also, thank you to Emily for making time to join us.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate you being here.
Touch with you, Paul. Good night.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Take care. Good night.
Bye.